Hi, today is Tuesday, and I'm going to read the second chapter of Dealing with Dragons by Patricia Reedy. Last time we left it, Cimarine was walking down a road and she walked into a creepy broken down hovel by knocking twice and snapping her fingers a couple of times. So here is chapter 2, in which Cimarine discovers the value of a classical education and has some unwelcome visitors. Inside the hovel was dark and cool and damp. Cimarine found it a pleasant relief after the hot, dusty road. But she wondered why no sunlight seemed to be coming through the cracks in the boards. She was still standing just inside the door, waiting for her eyes to adjust to the dark, when someone said crossly, "Is this the princess we've been waiting for?" "Why don't you ask her?" said a deep, rumbly voice. I'm the Princess Cimarine of Lindenwald," said Cimarine. "I was told you could help me." "Help her," said one of the voices, and Cimarine heard a snort. "I think we should just eat her and be done with it." Cimarine began to feel frightened. She wondered if the voices belonged to ogres or trolls, or whether she could slip out of the hovel before they made up their minds about eating her. She felt behind her for the door and started in surprise when her fingers touched damp stone instead of dry wood. When a third voice came, "Not so fast, Warog. Let's hear her story first." So Cimarine took a deep breath and began to explain about fencing lessons and the magic lessons and the Latin and the juggling and all of the other things that weren't considered proper behavior for a princess. And she told the voices that she had run away from Santham by the mountains to keep from having to marry Prince Thorindil. "And what do you expect us to do about it?" said one of the voices curiously. "I don't know," Cimarine said, "except of course that I would rather not be eaten. I can't see who you are in the dark, you know." "That can be fixed," said the voice. A moment later, a small ball of light appeared in the air above Cimarine's head, and Cimarine stepped backwards very quickly and ran into the wall. The voices belonged to dragons. 5 of them laid or sprawled all over or curled around various rocks and columns that filled the huge cave where Cimarine stood. Each of the males, there were 3, had 2 short, stubby, sharp-looking horns on either side of their heads. The female dragon had 3, one on each side and one in the center of her forehead. And the last dragon was apparently too young to have made up its mind which sex it wanted to be, so it didn't have any horns at all. Cimarine felt very frightened. The smallest of the dragons was easily 3 times as tall as she was, and they gave an overwhelming impression of shining green scales and sharp silver teeth. They were much scarier in person than in the pictures she remembered from their natural history books. She swallowed really hard, wondering whether she would rather be eaten by a dragon than marry Thorindil. "Well," said the 3-thorn dragon in front of her, "just what are you asking us to do for you?" Cimarine stopped short as an idea occurred to her, and cautiously she asked, "Dragons are fond of princesses, aren't they?" "Very," said the dragon, and smiled. The smile showed all her teeth, which Cimarine did not find reassuring. "That is, I heard dragons who have captive princesses to cook for them and so on," said Cimarine, who had very little idea what captive princesses do all day. The dragon in front of Cimarine nodded. One of the others, a yellowish green in color, shifted restlessly and said, "Oh, let's just go ahead and eat her. It will save trouble." Before any of the other dragons could answer, there was a loud, booming noise, and a 6th dragon slithered into the cave. His scales were more gray than green, and the dragons by the door made way for him respectfully. "Kazul," said the newcomer in a loud voice. "Achoo! I'm sorry I'm late, but a terrible thing happened on the way here. Achoo!" "What is it?" said the dragon to whom Cimarine had been talking. "I ran into a wizard. Achoo! I had to eat him. No help for it. Achoo! Achoo!" And now look at me. Every time the great green dragon sneezed, he emitted a small ball of fire that scorched the wall of the cave. "Calm down, Roxham," said Kazul. "You're only making it worse." "Achoo!" calm down when I'm having an allergy attack? Achoo! Oh, bother! Achoo! Said the great green dragon. Somebody give me a handkerchief! Achoo! Here, said Cimarine, holding out one of the ones she brought with her. Use this. She was beginning to feel much less frightened, for the gray-green dragon reminded her of her great uncle, who was old and rather hard of hearing, and of whom she was rather fond. What's that? Said Roxem. Achoo! Oh, hurry up and give it here. Kazul took the handkerchief from Cimarine, using two claws very delicately, and passed it to Roxem. The gray-green dragon mopped his streaming eyes and blew his nose. That's better, I think. Achoo! Oh, daft. The ball of fire that accompanied the dragon's sneeze had reduced the handkerchief to a charred scrap. Cimarine hastily dug out another one and handed it to Kazul, feeling very glad she had brought several spares. Roxem went through two more handkerchiefs before his sneezing spasms finally stopped. Oh, much better, he said. Now then, who's this and that lent me the handkerchiefs? Some new princess, huh? We were just discussing this when you came in, Kazul said, and she turned back to Cimarine. You were saying about cooking and so on. Oh, couldn't I do that for you for a while? Cimarine said. The dragon smiled again, and Cimarine swallowed. Possibly. Why would you want to do that? Because then I wouldn't have to go home and marry Thorndrill, Cimarine said. Being a dragon's princess is a perfectly respectful thing to do, and my parents couldn't complain. And they would be so much more interesting than embroidery and dancing lessons. Several of the dragons made snorting and choking noises, and Cimarine jumped and then decided that they were laughing. This is ridiculous, said a large, bright green dragon on Cimarine's left. Why? Said Kazul. A princess volunteering? That's out of the question. Oh, that's easy for you to say, said one of the other dragons. You already have a princess. What about the rest of us? Yes, but don't be stuffy, Warwag, said the other. Besides, what else can we do with her? Eat her, suggested the yellowish-green dragon in the bored tone. No proper princess would come out looking for dragons, Warwag objected. Well, I'm not a proper princess then, Cimarine said. I make Sherry's Jubilee, and I volunteer for dragons, and I conjugate Latin verbs, or at least I would if anybody would let me. So there. Hear, hear, said the gray-green dragon. You see, Warwick said, who would want an improper princess? I would, said Kazul. You can't be serious, Kazul, Warwick said irritably. Why? I like Cherry's Jubilee, Kazul replied, still watching Cimarine, and I like the look of her. Besides, the Latin scrolls in my library need cataloging, and if I can't find someone who knows a little of the language, I'd have to do it myself. Give her a trial run, then, the purplish-green dragon advised. Warwick snorted. Latin and Cherry's Jubilee. All for that you've been take on a black-haired, snippy little... I thank you to be polite when you're discussing my princess, Kazul said, and smiled fiercely. Nice little gal, Roxem said, nodding approvingly and waving Cimarine's next to last handkerchief. Got sense. Be good for you, Kazul. If it's so, then I'm going to find a snack, said the yellowish-green dragon. Warwick looked around, but the other dragons seemed to agree with Roxem. Oh, very well, he said grumpily. It's your choice after all, Kazul. It certainly is. Now, Princess, if you'll come with this way, I'll get you settled in. Cimarine followed Kazul across the caves and down the tunnel. To her relief, the ball of light came with her. She had the uncomfortable feeling that if she tried to walk behind Kazul in the dark, she would have stepped on her tail, which would have not been a good beginning. Kazul led Cimarine through a long maze of tunnels and finally stopped in another cave. Here we are, the dragon said. You can use the small room over on the right. I believe my last princess left most of the furnishings behind when she ran off with the knight. Thank you, Cimarine said. Where do I start my duties, and what are they, please? Well, you start right away, said Kazul. I want dinner at 7. In the meantime, you can begin sorting the treasure. The dragon nodded towards the dark opening on the left. I'm sure some of it needs repairing. There's at least one suit of armor with a leg off, And these cheaper magic swords are probably getting rusty. The rest of it really ought to be rearranged sensibly. I just can never find the time, anything when I want it. I can't find anything when I want it. What about the library you mentioned? Cimarine asked. Well, we'll see how well you do on the treasure room first. The rest of your job I'll explain as you go along. You don't object to learning a little magic, do you? Oh, not at all, said Cimarine. Good. It'll make things much easier. Go wash up, and I'll let you into the treasure room so you can get started. Cimarine nodded and went into the room Kazul, Kazul told her to use. As she washed her face and hands, she felt happier than she had in a long time. She was not going to have to marry Thorndil, and sorting a dragon's treasure sounded far more interesting than dancing or embroidery. She was even going to learn some magic, and her parents wouldn't worry about her once they found out where she was. For the first time in her life, Cimarine was glad she was a princess. She dried her hands and turned to go back into the main cave, wondering how best to persuade Kazul to help her brush up on her Latin. She didn't want the dragon to be disappointed in her skill. Draco Draconum Dracone, she muttered, and her lips curved into a smile. She had always been rather good at declining nouns. Still smiling, she started forward to begin her new duties. And I think I'll stop there for today. I'll get back to it tomorrow and we'll see what her duties entail. I hope you guys are doing well, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.